What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and while we're all excited for the What If series, there is one episode in particular that's going to change everything. See, I think most of the What If series is just going to focus on interesting what if stories, T'Challa becoming Star-Lord, different things along those lines. But the episode with Peggy Carter is going to be nuts, and here's the reason why. So the premise behind the Peggy Carter episode is that Peggy ends up being the one to take the super soldier serum instead of Steve Rogers, and this leads to her becoming Captain America, or technically Captain Britain as she's supposed to be called, because she's British and she has a super soldier serum, and that's basically it. Whether or not we end up seeing Britain developing the super soldier serum instead of the United States, we'll just have to wait till the episode comes out to find out. But the idea is that she's going to be operating under the mantle of Captain Britain. There's another character who operates under the mantle of Captain Britain, and you've heard of him before. In fact, you heard his name dropped in Avengers Endgame. His name is Brian Braddock. That's the reason why so many people were excited. What's the significance behind Captain Britain? Let's look at Marvel Comics for a second. In Marvel Comics, Captain Britain belongs to a larger group called the Captain Britain Corps. And the whole idea behind this is that these guys basically exist to protect the multiverse from various threats that exist out there. They suck, and they really can't do it effectively, mostly because they're not all that powerful. When you have a guy that can fly and he can punch really hard and he's got some measure of durability, he's painfully weak in the face of someone like the Marquis of Death, who can wipe out whole universes with a wave of his hand. Guy's totally unnecessary, to say nothing of the fact that Captain Britain would probably get pummeled by somebody like Thanos. But the important thing here is that's the role they play. Why do they play that role? Because the Captain Britain Corps was created by a guy named Merlin and his daughter named Roma. Technically it was Merlin first and then Roma who continued it. But the important thing here is that Merlin is exactly who you think he is. Merlin from Arthurian legend, King Arthur, Knights of the Round Table, all that kind of stuff. They basically exist in a place outside of all time and space, similar to the way the TVA existed. And this is where things get really interesting here. The whole idea behind the Captain Britain Corps is that when a person is selected, they are given two options. The first is the Amulet of Right or the Sword of Might. More often than not, Merlin and Roma focus on those individuals who choose the Amulet of Right, because that's basically a person who does things under logic, reason, and is a true champion. A person who chooses the Sword of Might just wants to destroy stuff, and so they're usually not chosen to become a Captain Britain, even though they are allowed to keep the sword. The important thing here is that when a person chooses the Amulet of Right, they go on to become a member of the Captain Britain Corps. Now, I don't think that selection process is going to be introduced in the MCU. Why? Because it's overly complicated, and in reality, it's unnecessary. It was cool, but it was never really a necessary thing. Instead, what you actually have going on right now, and something that you have had going on in Marvel Comics for a very long time, is a woman by the name of Saturnine, or Saturnine, depending on who you're talking to. Saturnine exists in a place called the Starlight Citadel, and this is, by all standards of measurement, the base of operations for the Captain Britain Corps. They don't really operate out of it per se, they all exist in their own universes, and they can access the multiverse by way of something called the Lighthouse, which exists on the coast in England. But if something pops off on a multiversal level and they all have to meet together, they all meet at the Starlight Citadel. Now, the cool thing about this is that you can look at the character of Saturnine and you can kind of package it all together in a pretty small and interesting way, right? We already know by virtue of Loki, the multiverse is back. We've seen a lot of those videos where they actually tie the return of the multiverse into the events of WandaVision, and you kind of have that moment where Wanda is officially becoming the Scarlet Witch that coincides with the moment when Immortus says, "We've crossed the threshold." A lot of you guys have already seen those videos, a lot of you guys are already aware of them, meaning the impact of the multiverse reforming is really a result of the Scarlet Witch, that once Wanda became that character, we crossed a line that we couldn't come back from, and it all just kind of popped off from there. But the important thing here is you can look at this idea of the War of Kangs that all took place before the multiverse formed and all that kind of stuff, and say that around that time, the Starlight Citadel and Saturnine existed, and the Captain Britain Corps was there. And it wouldn't be that hard to take the Captain Britain Corps and tie it in and say they were the part of the War of Kangs, that they were fighting on behalf of the good Kangs, the ones who didn't want to conquer the multiverse, and that despite it all, they were all basically destroyed, defeated, whatever the case happens to be, much like they were destroyed and defeated during the incursions during Jonathan Hickman's Avengers: A New Avengers run, one of the best stories ever. But the funny thing about this is that in the modern era right now, in fact, in the X-Men comics, Saturnine has brought back the entire Captain Britain Corps without the selection process of the Amulet of Right or the Sword of Might, meaning they can just kind of be arbitrarily chosen. And so the way I think this would play out in the Marvel Cinematic Universe is you basically have this idea that with the War of Kangs, the entire Captain Britain Corps was destroyed. Saturnine was doing whatever it was that she was doing, maybe just kind of operating in retreat or just kind of staying in silence, waiting for the time when the multiverse would come back. And now that it's here, she, alongside so many other people, are now making their moves. That the super evil version of Kang went back in time, ensured that he was the one that won the multiversal war and created the TVA, hence the reason why you see Kang at the end of the Loki series instead of Immortus and the Timekeepers. But also the idea that the Captain Britain Corps is now being reformed by virtue of the fact that all these Kangs are back. Because we have to believe that if the multiverse was a source of all these different versions of Kang and it led to a giant war among all these Kangs, that nobody who survived the experience would be preparing for that. That nobody surviving the experience would say, okay, what if the multiverse came back? We have to believe that there are other people out there that know the stories of Scarlet Witch, Nexus events, different things along those lines, and they had to be preparing for the idea that at some point it may return. At some point, the Scarlet Witch may take her mantle, and then the multiverse will end up returning, and everything will just kind of come to a head and it'll start all over again. And so the Captain Britain Corps returning is a great way to tie into that. It's a great way to bring those things together. Something else to keep in mind here is that yes, we were told at the end of Loki that the multiversal war was a war of Kangs, but I have a hard time believing it was just Kangs fighting Kangs. That surely they had like entire forces conscripted into their service. That if this is a conflict that led to the destruction of an entire universe, it would take more than just two guys getting into a fist fight. You understand what I'm saying? The amount of energy it takes to destroy an entire universe is huge, let alone the amount of energy it would take to destroy an entire multiverse. So there's not really anything to indicate that if these Kangs were going back and forth in their own timelines and it would lead to the destruction of their universes, it would just lead to more universes. So there had to be some kind of a massive conflict between these different Kangs and presumably all the forces they had at their disposal that led to the destruction of the multiverse. I honestly think that included groups like the Captain Britain Corps. And so at the end of that What If episode with Peggy Carter, I wouldn't be surprised if she ends up basically traveling to the lighthouse and then entering the lighthouse, or if she's met by Saturnine, possibly Merlin, Roma, or even other members of the Captain Britain Corps that basically take on this kind of perception the same way that Nick Fury did at the end of the first Iron Man movie and telling Peggy Carter, you're stepping into a much bigger world here. Surely you didn't think you were the only person across the multiverse to ever become Captain Britain. We're a giant team. Welcome to the club. Something along those lines. I think that's a great way to kind of sync all this stuff together. And so going forward, you would likely see something akin to like the Spider-Verse, where you have like a whole bunch of different Spider-Men from other realities all teaming up. You would see that in the future of the MCU. You would see Peggy Carter Captain Britain, along with maybe a version of Steve Rogers who was born in Britain and ended up becoming that universe's Captain Britain. In Marvel Comics, you got Spider-Man UK. So basically William Braddock, a guy who gained the powers of Spider-Man and then became Captain Britain, just things along those lines. This is the benefit of having the multiverse back. There's an endless number of possibilities. All kinds of things can take place. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments section regarding this stuff, because here's one thing to bear in mind is that, not to put too fine a point on it, but Immortus was kind of right when he said we've crossed the threshold. Right here in the real world, with the introduction of the multiverse in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, you can't come back from this. And the threats are wide and varying. We already know that Shumagorath is supposed to be in Doctor Strange 2, or at least that's what the news is saying anyway, all the different reports and so on and so forth. Shumagorath is part of the many-angled ones. The many-angled ones are basically the ones that exist between universes, and Shumagorath in particular has had a very fond interest in conquering the main Marvel universe, at least in the comics. But in the comics themselves, he's conquered multiple realities. There's entire universes, all of which are ruled completely by Shumagorath. The main Marvel universe is just the next step in this whole idea of conquest. So there's all kinds of things out there that Marvel can use on a multiversal level. That's not even including villains like the Marquis of Death, Mad Jim Jaspers, Matthew Malloy, the character of Protege who can copy the powers of anybody he sees. There's all kinds of things out there. I mean, how far-reaching they'll get probably won't be that extreme, right? The Marvel Cinematic Universe really predicates itself on focusing on real, tangible things that are kind of a reflection of the real world. But nonetheless, I think a lot of these possibilities are really there. And I love the idea of the Captain Britain Corps, because one of the benefits here is it can allow Marvel to bring back characters that we thought were long since dead. I doubt they'd be able able to get Robert Downey Jr. to come back as Iron Man, or even as a British version of Iron Man for like, some version of Captain Britain from some alternate reality, but we could see it in a future What If animated episode. That's the cool thing about this. That's the great possibility about these things, is that if the Captain Britain core really is returning, we may not necessarily see it in a movie form, but we could certainly see it in an animated form, right? Like a Captain Britain animated show, similar to What If. That's the possibilities here, guys. There's a lot of great things that can come out of this. So let me know what you guys think down in the comments section. Let me know if you guys are excited for this idea of the various forms of Captain Britain, the Captain Britain core, a multiversal team that exists to face off against all these different threats, possibly even having faced off against the various Kangs that existed out there in the multiversal war from Loki, all of which were destroyed, and now the team's in the process of being reformed, hence the reason Peggy Carter would be inducted onto the team. Let me know what you guys think about this. I feel like a lot of this stuff is really cool. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this to an end. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.